we go. Good evening, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We're going to get started in just a minute or two. My name is Allison Henry. I'm with LA Forward Institute. We're joined with a whole bunch of other guests. Very excited to have you on this evening's call. We will get started in about we'll get started in a minute or two, and if some of my co-hosts could assist with letting people in from the waiting room, thank you. And as we're waiting, please put your name, your city, and why you joined us tonight in the chat. And we'll get started in about a minute. All right, everyone, I know we're still gathering. Good evening on this warm Monday evening. Welcome to Grants Pass and Us, a teach-in. You are very welcome here this evening. We're going to give folks another minute to gather. While we're waiting, please, in the chat, put your name, your city, and why you joined us this evening. And we'll get started in just a minute. All right, good evening. It is 6:02. We usually wait 5 minutes. I usually call it a Californian hour at 5-minute mark, but we've got a lot to cover this evening. So we're going to go ahead and get started. As you join, please, in the chat, put your name, your city, and why you joined us this evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Allison Henry. I am the lead San Gabriel Valley organizer for LA Forward Institute. I'm also a Pasadena resident. I live in District 3. I serve on the Pasadena Rental Housing Board as an at-large member. I've lived in my apartment for about 14 years. So very excited to be co-hosting this teach-in with you this evening. Thank you for coming. This teach-in is brought to you by LA Forward Institute, Pasadena for All, Union Station Homelessness Services, San Gabriel Valley Consortium on Homelessness, and volunteers from our community. You will hear from some really amazing folks tonight. The confluence of decisions that have come from the United States Supreme Court, the state governor, and LA County around encampments, right to shelter, or camping in places when there's no shelter available, propelled many of us to create this evening, to set up a learning environment on these important decisions and how they're going to impact areas and cities in LA County, and quite frankly, beyond. Homelessness and encampments are not uniquely an LA County or California problem, folks. On a recent road trip I took to Arkansas to see the eclipse, I saw visible homelessness and encampments everywhere, even places said to be affordable. So we're just grateful to have this space tonight to learn together. So here's the agenda. We've got, after myself, we've got Victor Suarez, Pasadena for All, who's going to take us through additional context. We've got Katie McEwen and Sonia Burns, who will be walking us through the legal lenses of these decisions. Sean Morrissey is with us to talk about the on-the-ground impact of these decisions. David Sari will be walking us through some myths and trying to dispel them. We will then break out in small breakout groups by region. So as we come to that portion of the evening, the recording will stop, but also you can choose what breakout room you want to go into to learn more about either strategy or develop strategy or questions about your region. We're also going to be putting materials in the chat, uh, learning materials, the decisions themselves, some informational and educational materials, and we encourage you to share this out. We will be sharing out the recording and the slides. So with that, it is my great honor to pass it to Victor Suarez for the next part of the program.
Thanks, Allison, and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here on a Monday night of all nights. So great to see so many folks here. My name is Victor Suarez. I use he, him pronouns. I am here with Pasadena for All tonight. We're a mutual aid and advocacy organization housed in Pasadena. And we wanted to kick off today's teach-in by really taking stock of the moment that we're in. And really talking through about how the Grants Pass decision and Governor Newsom's subsequent order to clear encampments on public property, how both of these decisions are being felt in communities across California. So let's dive in. So the Grants Pass decision came down on June 28th, and Governor Newsom's order came down shortly after. And in the span of a few weeks, we've already seen quite a range of responses from local governing bodies in California, as you can see by these headlines. So Fresno, as one example, in Fresno, we saw the city council come out in favor of criminalization. The city council came down with an ordinance that would make sitting, lying, or camping on public property illegal. Violators would face a $1,000 fine, and if they still don't comply, they could face up to 1 year in jail. Let's do the next slide. And on the other side of the spectrum, in the city of LA, we're seeing city leaders like LA City Controller Kenneth Mejia publicly state, and I quote, "The city of LA must reject Governor Newsom's inhumane and unproven policy." In LA County, the Board of Supervisors has said that they won't indiscriminately clear homeless encampments or jail unhoused residents simply for sleeping outside. The board also expressed skepticism about how it would enforce Governor Newsom's order directing agencies to clear encampments from state property. And we'll dive a little bit deeper into this action by the board a little later in this teach-in. Some additional context. Following the Grants Pass decision, we also heard Torrance Mayor say that he would conduct a review of its ordinances in their city. Monrovia City Manager said that he is awaiting legal advice. And Santa Monica officials have said that they are going to continue to implement a robust and wide-ranging strategy for addressing homelessness. Let's do the next slide. Oh, we're set. And in my community of Pasadena, we're seeing our mayor and some members of our city council unfortunately side with criminalization. Our mayor here in Pasadena openly welcomed the Supreme Court's decision. And it's why, at Pasadena for All and other folks in our community, we've begun to organize and mobilize already, getting folks to public comments, submitting public record requests for city data, and developing public ed content. And so over the next few months, we can likely expect to continue to see a range of responses across our 88 cities in our county. And it'll be important for our communities to ensure that our city leaders don't fall into the trap of seeing the issue of homelessness only through the perspective of those who are housed, while leaving out the voices of those who are actually experiencing homelessness. And this potential range of responses that will be experienced at the local level also underscores why collective action, direct action really matters, and why it's so encouraging that all of us are here tonight. And so with that context, I'm going to pass it over to Sonia, who is a retired state attorney and a fellow Pasadena resident and advocate who's going to walk us through the legal lens of the Grants Pass decision. So off to you, Sonia.
Thanks, Victor. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us all tonight on this very, very important subject. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk just briefly about the Supreme Court case, Grants Pass versus Johnson, the reason we're here tonight. In that case, the city of Grants Pass, Oregon, had enacted ordinances prohibiting camping on public property and overnight parking in city parks. Violations of these ordinances could trigger a fine. For repeated violations, a person could actually be sentenced up to 30 days in prison. The federal district court issued an injunction, which is a court order, against the city's enforcement of these ordinances. That was based on an earlier Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals case called Martin versus City of Boise. In the Martin case, the appellate court held that enforcement of bans against sleeping on public property when there's no access to alternative shelter violates the U.S. Constitution's Eighth Amendment Cruel and Unusual Punishments Clause. Then Grants Pass appealed the injunction and eventually to the U.S. Supreme Court. Next slide, please. In June 2024, the majority of the Supreme Court, 6 justices, held that the enforcement of laws regulating camping on public property does not violate the Eighth Amendment. It is not cruel and unusual punishment to forbid unhoused people from sleeping on public property. So, cities can arrest or fine people if they choose to, even if those people have no access to shelter. The majority opinion said it is up to local governments to decide how to deal with homelessness. The majority opinion also states near the end that a handful of federal judges cannot match the collective wisdom the American people possess in deciding how to handle homelessness. And this is a really important statement. It doesn't say local officials know best how to handle homelessness in their city. It says the American people do, and that is all of us, including our unhoused neighbors and service providers who have boots on the ground and know what works and what doesn't, far better than our elected officials. Next slide, please. Justice Sonia Sotomayor wrote a powerful dissenting opinion, and 2 justices joined in that opinion. She skillfully explained that for people with no access to shelter, fining them and jailing them for sleeping on public property punishes them for their status as homeless. And this does violate the Eighth Amendment's Cruel and Unusual Punishments Clause. Next slide, please. So, the bottom line in Grants Pass. First, nothing in Grants Pass requires cities to issue criminal penalties against people sleeping on public property. Second, nothing in Grants Pass prevents cities from declining to criminalize people for sleeping in public when there is no available shelter. But third, cities will be free to do so without fear that they can be successfully sued on the ground that their action violates the Eighth Amendment's Cruel and Unusual Punishments Clause. And now I'll turn the discussion over to Katie McEwen.
Thank you so much for giving us that overview of the Supreme Court case. Hi, everyone. My name is Katie McEwen. I use she, her pronouns. My day job is as a housing attorney with the Western Center on Law and Poverty. We're a statewide nonprofit that provides support to legal aid providers across the state of California who are working on housing issues. And that can range from tenants' rights issues to land use issues to homelessness issues. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we've seen from the state of California and from our local governments in just the past 6 weeks or so since the Grants Pass decision was officially released. As Victor mentioned in the intro, Governor Newsom did issue an executive order in the last week of July, so about 3 weeks ago, ordering a few different things. So first, Governor Newsom ordered all of the state agencies and departments that he oversees to adopt policies about how to address encampments that may be on state property. The executive order stated that these policies that are to be adopted by each of the departments needs to address providing notice to residents of the encampment when a sweep or removal is set to happen, though it provided that those sweeps might happen very quickly if the agency has determined that there's an imminent health risk associated with the encampment. The governor also ordered that the agencies have a plan in place for holding individuals' belongings for up to 60 days, assuming that the agencies haven't determined that the belongings also present an imminent health risk and thus need to be destroyed right away. Now, the executive order does not provide or demand that there are civil or criminal penalties or arrest included in these policies. However, he does not say that they shouldn't include those penalties. It's silent as to that. So it will be something to monitor about how these state agencies and departments put together their own policies and how they are implemented on state property where there may be encampments. That's kind of the first and strongest part of the executive order, where Governor Newsom has the most power to order these policies to be put in place. The second part of the executive order really encouraged local governments to also adopt similar policies for clearing out encampments on local public property. He points to a lot of things that the state government has done in order to provide local governments money and resources to house folks. I think we are all in agreement that it hasn't been enough given the scale of the issue. But he strongly worded encouragement that local governments should be adopting these policies. And then just this past week, and I'll drop this, Allison, I think you had a link to the executive order, which we can put in the chat. But I'm also going to put a recent news article about Governor Newsom coming down to the LA area, participating in a sweep himself. And making it clear that his administration will be looking very hard at local jurisdictions who do not adopt the policies to clear out encampments. And so even though the executive order was relatively neutral with regards to what he was asking local jurisdictions to do, in subsequent comments, he's made it clear that he will be looking at stripping funding from folks, from local governments that aren't taking encampments or approaching encampments with his own approach. Next slide, please. However, at least with the LA County Board of Supervisors, they are clearly pushing back against this executive order from Governor Newsom. So about a week after, or 5 days or so after the executive order came down, the LA County Board of Supervisors received a presentation on their approach to homelessness from a variety of their agencies, and then adopted a motion to basically confirm that they were going to continue to approach homelessness with a CARES First approach. They confirmed that LA County jails will not be used to hold people who are violating anti-camping ordinances where they have jurisdiction to do so. And they are really looking to work with other local governments, the 88 cities that comprise of LA County, to work together to ensure that folks are addressing the problem by doing housing first and not simply pushing people across jurisdictional boundaries into another city, but instead really looking to take a regional approach to this issue. And lastly, I would just like to, I believe that we also have a link to the motion that can be dropped in the chat. I'm also going to drop a link to the 9-page PDF presentation that the county received on July 30th, which I think provides a lot of great context about Grants Pass, the executive order, and LA County's approach to this issue moving forward. So thank you all. I hope you all learned something, and I will pass it on to our next presenter.
Thank you, Katie. Glad to see everybody. My name is Sean Morrissey. I am the Vice President of Advocacy and Community Engagement for Union Station Homeless Services. I'm also a formerly homeless man, and I highlight that to kind of underscore the importance of having the voice of lived expertise, that representation in the room and during any of these discussions that we're having around Grants Pass or homelessness in general. I want to try to talk a little bit about the impacts of what this looks like on the ground, not only for service providers, because this ties our hands. I'm also going to invite David, my colleague, to jump in if I miss anything. But the people who are experiencing homelessness, and to remind people, I think, of what we really in our hearts know, which is that encampments are basically people, human beings doing what they know how to do in terms of congregating, seeking safety, seeking comfort, seeking and creating community. That's really what an encampment is about, creating community. It's one of our, innate instincts, this thing that we do, whether we're housed or unhoused, we look to congregate and create community and safety. And that's really what an encampment is. And encampments don't look pretty. And I think it's also helpful to describe why encampments look like they look. And it's not because people want to live, in trash and clutter and chaos. It's that we as a society have chosen to not give people what they need while they're forced to live on the street in terms of basic hygiene, the ability to throw trash out, trash receptacles. We have intentionally kept those types of resources away from people because we didn't want to enable homelessness. And I always think of it like this: if I had to leave my home at 2 a.m. and walk 2 miles to find a bathroom that maybe I could use or maybe I couldn't because I'm not a paying customer. If I had to walk to empty trash a mile or two miles and, take the risk of using a trash receptacle on private property, which would then, put me in perhaps a legal jackpot, what might my home look like if that was the case, if I didn't have running water, if I didn't have access to toilets? And, because we've intentionally kept those kinds of resources away from people, encampments end up looking like they look. It's not surprising, but I don't know that we think about like that aspect of it a lot. Displacing people creates havoc within our homeless service sector. Being able to reconnect with people. People experiencing homelessness are suffering a trauma to begin with. And then, you have someone coming into your home, the place that you're living, and forcing you to move on. A lot of times what happens is, life-sustaining property is lost in terms of medication, clothing, blankets, things like that. There's lots of studies to show that, moving an encampment or destroying an encampment is dangerous, to the lives of the people who are living there. And we have recent studies around 4118. And we also know that we have done this before. We've done different versions of criminalizing just existing before. If you look at Los Angeles's Safer Cities initiative, which was an effort to crack down on small crime or violations. What that did was it grew our homeless problem. And so what we're looking at with this type of thing is we're looking at actually growing the homeless problem, making it harder for service providers to work with people and entangling human beings in a justice system that takes them off track of any housing avenue or solution that they were on. We've seen that happen over and over again. It's dumb policy. It's born out of fear, and there's nothing on the back end. So really what all of this is going to do is create havoc, push people from their encampments into creating encampments in other communities, and for what? With that, I think I'll shut up and I'll turn it over to David.
Yeah, just as a final thought to this too. Yeah, like Sean said, we have an immediate case study of this, right? 4118 in LA City, a massive area in Los Angeles County that is really in the heat of this issue. And I'll even drop this in the chat as I go into my presentation. Different council districts enforce it differently. And at LAHSA, the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, of which I was a part, and I was a part of the data team that implemented the homeless count. So I'll share a little bit about the data on homelessness too, but you can directly look at the changes in homelessness for each city council district and then point directly to the enforcement of 4118 for a very easy, bring it to city council, make your case. Okay, so my name's David. In addition to my background in data and homelessness, I'm also a care coordinator at Union Station Homeless Services. I'm here to dispel myths. Honestly, what I wanted to dedicate this to was the person you run into at meetings over Thanksgiving who is completely on the wrong side of this. You're going to see sort of the basic arguments against a housing first policy and basic arguments in favor of more enforcement and more draconian measures towards homelessness. And I want to sort of like equip you with the tools rhetorically and data-wise to break down those arguments. So let's go to the next slide here. I think I have a duplicate cover slide here. Yeah, so there's my little faces that I will use to resemble the people you're talking to. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so first myth, right? First approach, and honestly, one of the most egregious is I want to help, but look, David, everyone living on the street is addicted to drugs or mentally ill. So stigmatizing language right off the bat. This is like the stigma portion of what you'll run into. I want to just break down what we have from LAHSA's homeless count. And this is over the past, 10 years. It's always floated around. 27% of people experiencing homelessness reported substance abuse. 26% experiencing homelessness reported a mental health issue or diagnosis. That is self-reported data. We also have the HIC data wound up in that. That's shelter data where folks are inside, they're seeing case managers, they're seeing therapists and psychiatrists. So this is like hardline, well-studied, well-documented facts that no, it's not 90%, it's not 100% are struggling with these issues. And most importantly, my last bullet point here, it doesn't matter, right? Substance abuse, mental unwellness are not moral failings, and lucidity or sobriety should not be prerequisites to being treated like a human being. So a lot of that is intuitive to us here in this meeting, but that's definitely something that needs to be hammered home. And these are some stats to demonstrate that. Okay, next slide. So myth number 2, you can see the person here is a little nervous, sees they're dealing with a professional. Okay, but wait a second, housing won't solve the problem. Most of these people don't even want housing. So first of all, these people, cringe language, you can call them out on that. But I also want to go into housing first models and corroborating the success there. There's been plenty of studies on this. Objectively, models that prioritize a transition to permanent supportive housing over compliance, right? Making sure someone is, like I said, sober or mentally fit to live in a home. Alternatively, programs that prioritize moving people into shelter or permanent housing first, they see profoundly better success. Studies show that 88% of participants within the nature of the study, which is about 5 years, exited to permanent solutions, either exited out of homelessness entirely or went into a permanent supportive housing structure where their homelessness was cured, so to speak. Also, COVID era policies, which there's a lot of stigma associated with them, like Project Roomkey, Project Homekey, a massive upscaling in rapid rehousing, RH. We actually saw success from those programs because for the first time, because of COVID, we had to move people off the street into shelters for our own health, the health of us housed. And so we actually implemented a somewhat of a housing first strategy abroad, especially in LA City. And it was the first time in many years that we saw homelessness plateau between 2022 and 2019 and 2020, where we sort of did like half-baked homeless counts because of COVID. So that's a huge deal, right? There's your evidence right there that shelter works. And also, we don't have enough housing. I mean, I can write a novel on this, but and I'll throw in the chat some of these links real shortly. But we're about 30,000 interim housing and permanent housing supportive beds, shelter beds. We're short 30,000, right? That's documented by the California Housing Partnership, which does tons of research on this issue. And I'll link in their latest affordable housing needs report. So even if the system worked great and we found all these people, there's not a bed to take them. And that's a huge issue. Finally, the California State Department of Housing and Community Development reported like 3 years ago that we need 2.5 million more homes by 2026. This is an objective body that has studied the issue for years. And so again, reiterating the need. Next slide here. Fine, David, but who's going to pay for all this? Aren't we giving like billions of dollars every year to homelessness stuff? We can't afford this. Well, to that person, I say studies have shown that implementing housing first programs, moving people into supportive structures actually costs less because you're reducing the strain on jails, law enforcement, just moving people around, which we are now advocating for through grants passed in 4118, and emergency shelters. Those things are costly. And so the long-term cost offset, again, abjectly outweighs the negatives, the costs of implementing a housing first model. To go back to 4118, to name drop that again, it costs like $3 million every year. I want to drop here in the chat. Like I said, it is sporadically enforced. So different council members enforce it at different rates. And so we only have like 2 council districts out of all of them that really enforce it heavily. And already it's costing this much. Imagine if we were to implement an enforcement model throughout the entire county, let alone the entire state. So that's one thing. The cost just doesn't add up for an enforcement mechanism or an enforcement solution to homelessness. Next slide. And now he's very angry. All right, I admit it. I just don't want homeless shelters in my neighborhood. I can't take any chances. It's dangerous, right? So this is like sort of where we get into the safety argument, the NIMBY argument. Well, I got a family. Research suggests that high opportunity, high income, and safe neighborhoods sees no significant changes in crime rates with an influx of affordable or subsidized housing. I'm just going to read that right off. This rolls right off the tongue. It's just a myth. Anyone who says otherwise, there's plenty of studies to suggest it. There's one linked here that I'll put in the chat. And then again, just to reiterate, we're 30,000 beds short. There's plenty of people in these neighborhoods, these affluent neighborhoods, that will benefit from more affordable housing. Especially, I could just point to anecdotally my home city of Pasadena and the bordering cities like San Marino that are losing young families because they're moving further and further east because they can't afford to live there, and public schools are closing down. So the notion that the people who have a home and they're sitting pretty, they're going to be helped out by affordable housing too, right? They're not going to lose anything. They stand to gain from a more affordable housing structure. They don't lose anything. And finally, University of Minnesota released a study of like the movement, the economic movement of cities across Los Angeles County, across the country rather. But LA County was the #1 most gentrifying county as of 2019. That was the last time they did the study. So we are seeing gentrification. We are seeing like a mobile, nomadic lack of housing affordability, housing unaffordability that needs to be resolved. And that's just some of the ways that you can dispel the notion that the folks inside these affluent neighborhoods, it's going to be just as safe, and they're also going to stand to profit economically and citywide. So those are some of the ways you can dispel some of the arguments you might see in the Thanksgiving table. I definitely encourage you to use these, and I encourage you to go to those city council meetings, go equipped with these talking points. Be ready, because they might say it in more pedantic language, but they will say these arguments. So have these ready to go. With that, I'm going to pass it back to Allison, and we're going to we're going to go into breakout rooms.
Great. Thank you, David. And thank you to all of our presenters for their presentations and information and the links. At this point, I'm going to stop the recording